Something catastrophic is unfolding beneath the surface of daily life in Iran's capital, and this time it is not driven by politics, protest, or foreign pressure. It is driven by something far more basic, far more unforgiving, and far more destabilizing: water. Tehran is facing a rapidly escalating water crisis that has crossed a psychological and logistical tipping point, triggering panic, emergency measures, and the first signs of mass evacuation from a city that was never meant to move. What began as shortages and rationing has now evolved into systemic failure, and the consequences are spreading faster than authorities can contain. For years, warnings about water scarcity circulated quietly among engineers, planners, and scientists. Reservoir levels dropped, aquifers were overdrawn, rivers shrank. The city kept growing anyway. Tehran expanded outward and upward, adding millions of residents, while its water infrastructure aged, cracked, and strained. Those warnings were easy to ignore when taps still worked. They are impossible to ignore now that they do not. In recent days, entire districts woke to dry pipes. Not reduced pressure, not scheduled outages, nothing. Households waited hours, then days, for water trucks that arrived late or not at all. Hospitals activated emergency protocols. Schools closed abruptly. High-rise buildings, dependent on pumps that require constant pressure, became uninhabitable above the lowest floors. Elevators stopped. Toilets stopped. Life, as the city understands it, stopped. Panic spread not because people were thirsty, but because the failure felt permanent. Temporary hardship can be endured. Structural collapse cannot. When water disappears without a clear timeline for restoration, fear takes hold quickly. People begin to ask questions authorities cannot answer. How long will this last? Which areas will recover first? Who will be left behind? As the crisis deepened, traffic surged out of the city. Families packed cars with essentials and left for relatives' homes in surrounding provinces. Those without cars crowded bus terminals and informal transport hubs. Fuel stations saw long lines as people tried to secure a way out. This was not an organized evacuation announced by officials. It was a spontaneous, organic flight driven by instinct. That is what alarmed authorities most. When people begin to leave on their own, control is already slipping. Water crises are uniquely destabilizing because they strike at the core of urban life. Electricity can flicker and return. Communications can fail and be restored. But without water, nothing functions. Sanitation collapses. Healthcare becomes fragile. Food preparation halts. Fire risk increases. Disease spreads. A modern city without water is not just uncomfortable, it is unlivable. Tehran's infrastructure was never designed for sustained scarcity. Much of the city relies on aging pipelines prone to leaks and bursts. Informal settlements lack redundancy entirely. As pressure dropped, pipes cracked, further reducing supply and making recovery harder. Each attempt to restore flow triggered new failures elsewhere. The system began cannibalizing itself. Authorities issued statements urging calm and conservation. They announced emergency water transfers and drilling efforts, but such measures take time, and time is the one thing the city no longer has. Water trucks cannot supply millions indefinitely. New wells cannot replenish depleted aquifers overnight. Desalination is not an option inland. The gap between promises and reality widened by the hour. Public trust eroded quickly. When officials insist the situation is under control while taps remain dry, credibility evaporates. People stop listening. They start acting. Hoarding begins. Bottled water disappears from shelves. Prices spike. Black markets emerge. Inequality becomes painfully visible as wealthier neighborhoods secure private deliveries while poorer areas go without. Hospitals became focal points of anxiety. Emergency water reserves were activated, but those reserves are finite. Sterilization procedures were scaled back. Non-essential services were suspended. Patients were transferred when possible. Medical staff worked under conditions that would be unthinkable in normal times. Every hour without stable water increased risk. Schools closed not just because of hygiene concerns, but because staff could not guarantee basic safety. Offices followed. Construction halted. Industry slowed. Economic activity in the capital began to seize up. When a city like Tehran stops working, the effects ripple nationwide. Supply chains break, government functions stall, the crisis stops being local. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. Water is not just a resource, it is a symbol of stability. When it fails, it signals that something fundamental is wrong. People who might tolerate political uncertainty or economic hardship struggle to cope with the absence of basic survival necessities. Anxiety turned to anger. Anger turned to fear. Fear turned to flight. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some claimed contamination. Others claimed sabotage. Still others warned that the worst was yet to come. In the absence of reliable information, imagination filled the void. Social cohesion frayed as neighbors competed for limited supplies. Community networks helped where they could, but they too were overwhelmed. Security forces were deployed to protect water infrastructure and distribution points. Their presence was meant to reassure. For many, it had the opposite effect. Armed guards at water trucks do not signal normalcy. They signal emergency. They confirm that the state fears disorder. That confirmation accelerates panic rather than calming it. As evacuations increased, new problems emerged. Roads clogged, fuel supplies tightened, smaller towns struggled to absorb incoming residents. Water stress followed people out of the city, transferring pressure rather than relieving it. A crisis that began in Tehran started radiating outward, turning into a regional emergency. The regime's worst fear in moments like this is not protest, but loss of governability. Protests can be confronted. Water scarcity cannot be dispersed. When millions depend on systems that no longer function, authority becomes irrelevant. You cannot command water to flow. You cannot arrest a drought. You cannot intimidate physics. Internally, emergency councils met continuously. Scenarios were modeled. Priorities were debated. Which neighborhoods get water first? Which facilities are protected at all costs? How much can be diverted without collapsing other regions? These are zero-sum questions, and zero-sum decisions create winners and losers. In crisis, losers do not stay quiet. Evacuation became the unspoken strategy. Officials did not announce it, but their actions suggested acceptance that the city could not sustain its full population under current conditions. Temporary relocation was encouraged quietly. Government offices prepared to operate remotely or from secondary locations. This was not abandonment, but it looked like it. Water crises exposed the fragility of urban concentration. Tehran grew faster than its environment could support. Climate patterns shifted, rainfall declined, snowpack diminished, consumption increased. Years of mismanagement compounded natural stress. The bill has now come due, and it is being paid all at once. For residents, the realization was brutal. This was not a temporary outage. It was a reckoning. People who had lived their entire lives assuming water would always be there confronted a future where that assumption no longer held. That psychological shock changes behavior permanently. Even if water returns, trust does not. Nightfall intensified fear. Darkness without water feels more dangerous. Hygiene deteriorates. Fire hazards increase. Emergency services struggle. People cluster together for safety, but clustering strains resources further. The city's rhythms broke down. Normal reference points vanished. Markets reacted instantly. Prices surged. Currency weakened. Investors pulled back. A city in panic does not inspire confidence. The economic cost of the water crisis began to rival its humanitarian impact. Businesses planned closures. Workers faced displacement. The crisis became multidimensional. There is no quick fix for this kind of emergency. Water systems take years to build and decades to manage responsibly. Once depleted, aquifers recover slowly, if at all. Climate trends suggest scarcity will worsen, not improve. Tehran is not just facing a bad season, it is facing a structural limit. This is why panic has taken hold. People sense that this is not a problem that will be solved by waiting. They sense that the city they know may no longer be viable in its current form. That realization triggers survival instincts that override loyalty, routine, and patience. Mass evacuation is not orderly. It is uneven, chaotic, and socially disruptive. Those with means leave first. Those without remain longest. Inequality deepens. Tension rises between those who can escape and those who cannot. Resentment builds, adding a volatile social layer to an already dangerous situation. The state attempts to project calm, but its tools are blunt against environmental collapse. Statements do not produce water. Security does not refill reservoirs. Authority does not reverse climate trends. In moments like this, power is measured not by force, but by competence, and competence is under question. As the crisis unfolds, the fear is not just about dehydration, it is about what comes next. Disease outbreaks, food shortages, unrest, permanent displacement. A capital city losing population at scale is not just a humanitarian issue, it is a political earthquake. Tehran has always been more than a city. It is the administrative heart, the economic engine, the symbolic center. When it panics, the entire country feels it. When it evacuates, the implications are national. For now, the exodus continues in fits and starts. Some leave, some wait, some hope for relief that may or may not come. Water trucks rumble through streets like lifelines, but they cannot sustain a metropolis. The silence of dry pipes speaks louder than any announcement. This is not the end of the crisis. It is the beginning of a new phase, a phase where environmental limits assert themselves with brutal clarity, where political narratives collapse under physical reality, where survival becomes the primary concern. Tehran is panicking because it understands what is at stake. Not just comfort, not just stability, but viability. A city without water cannot endure. And as the taps remain dry and the roads fill with those fleeing, one truth becomes unavoidable. The water crisis has transformed from a warning into a turning point, and the consequences will shape the country long after the immediate emergency passes.